Our next two witnesses together are Mark and Richard, are they?
Yes, sir.
Mark and Richard, please.
Please state your full name
Mark Anthony Ward.
and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please state your full name
Richard Nicholas Dudley Smith.
and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Mark, you were diagnosed with severe haemophilia A at Great Ormond Street Hospital as a child.
Yes.
And we have a photo we're going to put up of you as a child. It's 1591007, please, Henry. We can see there a very lovely photo of you. How old were you then?
I'd think about maybe 4, 5.
And you were treated at Great Ormond Street from 1972 to 1983.
Yes.
And you've described your childhood very vividly in your statement as one in which you spent more time in hospital or in the back of an ambulance than at home.
Yes.
You had a lot of bleeds and a lot of pain.
Yes.
And you missed a lot of school.
Yeah.
And that in itself led to difficulties when you then were at school.
It did, yeah.
You were teased. There were episodes where you had to have assistance at school and you found that difficult and embarrassing.
Yeah, I was the school freak. Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
The reason I chose that picture, and this is, I'm not coming out fighting, by the way, this is the gloves off. I want all the lawyers, the legal team, the government to look at that face. Don't look at this 50-year-old man sitting here. Look at that little face there, because that's the face that they began their research on. That's the face that they deemed was suitable for doing whatever they wanted to.
You received, over the years, treatments with cryoprecipitate and then with Factor VIII products. Do you know which Factor VIII products you received?
I think anything that was going. Probably scraped it up off the road, I don't know. But it was all the suspects we've seen, the Alpha, the normal ones, the Armour.
So your understanding is you received the commercial pharmaceutical company products. We know at one stage, and we'll come on to that, you received the Scottish NHS product. As far as you know, did you also receive the BPL Factor VIII, the Lister product?
Yes, yeah. The Factor VIII was... I was placed onto it covertly. The one thing that I wasn't born normal. I want to make that clear. So when you're not born normal, there's not a normal life. So it would be like you can see in that picture. Yeah. So I probably would have been at nursery during the day, and then that night with a major nosebleed, I'm bleeding to death, literally bleeding to death. And then I'd probably spend 4 or 5 days in hospital having treatment and also with whole blood. So there was nothing natural about my childhood. But the swap was, I was on cryoprecipitate, and I went down in the middle of the night in April 1977 with a major nosebleed. And because they would go away and make the treatment up and then come back and just administer it, we didn't know. And it was only days after, when we were in the haemophilia unit at Great Ormond Street, that we saw the nurse start making up the treatment, and that's when my mum questioned it and said, he's not on that. And that's how we found out, oh no, he was put on it, and they said, well, there's no point in putting him back now because he's already made the swap.
Were your parents, as far as you know, given any warning or information or advice about any risks of infection?
Definitely not, no.
Now, in 1983, it was decided that you needed a knee operation.
Yeah, they told me my knee was so swollen up, it looked so, with my skinny legs, it looked like there's a bubble in the middle of my leg. And they said if they didn't do this synovectomy operation, then I would be in a wheelchair by the time I was 21.
And that was the point at which your care was transferred from Great Ormond Street to the Royal Free Hospital.
Yes.
And you had that surgery at the Royal Free Hospital in 1984.
Yes.
We have a second photo to display from around this time. Henry, it's 1591008. This, I think, is you in hospital when you've had the surgery.
Yeah,
And that's your auntie sitting next to you.
it is, yeah. And this photograph, as you can see, the little boy, again, in the bed. They know I've got AIDS, and this was taken a month before I was told I had AIDS.
You were in hospital for about 6 weeks on that occasion. You've said in your statement that you understand that you received Scottish Factor 8, NHS Factor 8, during that hospital admission.
Yeah, it was actually for the very first week. So it was when I first went in, the only treatment I had administered for that first 1 week only was Scottish product. And I've checked through my notes. I'd never had it before, and I've never had it since. It was just that 1 week.
What then happened the day you were discharged from hospital from that admission?
Whilst being in hospital, they had access to bone and the tissue that from when they did the operation. They had access to basically everything, all bodily fluids, the lot. On the day of discharge, my parents came to collect me from the ward, took me down, and the car was parked outside the haemophilia centre. And as my dad was wheeling me through the haemophilia centre, behind reception there was a hatch which looked into the room where they made the treatment up. And this haemophilia sister, popped up and just shouted across the room, "Mr. and Mrs. Ward, do you want to know Mark's HIV result?" And we all sort of looked at the mum and dad looked at each other, and yeah. So she went, "Oh, positive, see you next time." So I was taken home.
Your parents and you had not, as I understand your statement, been made aware that you were being tested.
No. And the thing I have real issue with is that 14-year-old little boy there, number one, they had me captive for 6 weeks. Mum and Dad didn't know what was going on in that hospital, what they were doing. They had 6 weeks to even say to my mum and dad, look, because of the current climate, haemophiliacs, there's a potential risk. Would you like us to test Mark while he's here? They had no conversation at all like that. It was just, oh, you're positive, bye.
And your recollection is that this occasion when the nurse provided that information in that way was 1984?
Yes.
It's right, I should point out that there's an entry in your records, we don't have it to display, but I know you've seen it, 26th of July 1985, which says anti-HDLV3 POS result given. Whatever that refers to, you're confident that you heard the news first, whatever the precise date was, in the way you've described?
Definitely, because we went into Christmas 1984 knowing that I was going to die. And because of that major knee surgery at that point in time, it wasn't that I just went home and didn't go back. I was backwards and forwards then almost every week for them to check the scars, check bleeding, having a further x-rays to make sure the operation had been successful. And when we went back next time, the consultant in the haemophilia centre told us tell nobody because we can't guarantee your safety. It's a need to know situation, and nobody needs to know.
And that was the follow-up appointment with Dr. Kernoff. You were told not to tell anyone. And what were you told about prognosis as to how long you might live?
Oh, if you're lucky, you might have 3 to 5 years, but you probably won't live long enough to leave school.
And your parents were told that, or advised that if there were things that you wanted to do, like go to Disneyland, do it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You then describe in your statement media reports at the time about AIDS, and that how that led to your mum being called into your school. What happened?
Because we were seeing the pictures on the television of the rows of gay men in hospital wards, dying. Just those vivid images, I'll never forget them. But Mum got called up to school because, like what was happening in America, parents were questioning the safety of being around me, basically. Thankfully, because I've got such a fantastic mum, and actually the headmaster was pretty cool as well. He said that he would allow me to continue being at the school, but obviously if they had a complaint, then it would have to be reviewed, and he would regularly meet with Mum to discuss how things were going and my health.
And you've said in your statement that bullying, name-calling and intimidation intensified. You were already teased about your sexuality, and you then were asked over and over again if you had AIDS yet.
Yeah. What people probably haven't seen, because I'm very good, I hide it well, like all haemophiliacs. My right arm is a weak joint. It was damaged as a baby. So in those days, the treatment was rest. So it's actually, it's self-fused, but perfectly in the shape of where a sling sits. I've got that movement, but I can't straighten it. So as you can imagine, walking around when you forget and your arm's like that, oh, it's John Inman, it's Larry Grayson, give us a kiss. And so the gay element of teasing and yeah, it was bullying. It was there for that. And then, of course, when AIDS came along, it was, yeah, Wardy, have you got AIDS yet?
And you said you, in your final year at school, before you left in 1985, you were terrified of going into school.
Yeah, I just... You've been told you might not live long enough to go to school. I know, I'll go and sit a religious education exam, and on the way in, I'll just get tormented because, being a gay boy.
You've told us how you learnt that you were HIV positive. How and when did you learn that you had hepatitis C?
Oh, years later. I went into a haemophilia HIV review with Professor Lee, and the office that we used was a different one from her normal one. So where I sat in the chair here, the desk was here. So my notes were here beside me as Professor Lee sat here writing in them. I've always been fascinated by biology, and actually, for me, the HIV, I needed to know information about it, because if I knew as much as I could, then maybe I could look after myself and basically try and keep myself alive. So I was looking at what she was writing, and there was boxes on this page. The first box had HIV, the next box down said HCV. And I didn't know what that was, so I asked, what does HCV mean? Is it a different type of HIV, or what, is it the immune system? So she went, no, it's hepatitis C. So I said, hepatitis C? She said, because of the treatment you got, basically one piggybacks on the back of the other. So if you've got one, you've got two. But you don't have to worry about that because you'll be long dead from AIDS.
That was, you've estimated in your statement, 1991.
Yeah.
I should say that we're awaiting a response from Professor Lee to criticisms you've made in your statement. You've made a number of critical observations in your statement about care you received at the Royal Free Hospital. And I'm not going to ask you about the detail of a number of those criticisms. I will ask you about some of the general themes. But I should just say, really for the record now, we've had responses, and you've seen them, from Professor Nathwani, Professor Deshako, Dr. Yee, Ms. Deborah Pollard, Dr. Chowdhury, and then in response to observations from Richard in his statement, Dr. Wild, in relation to care at Birmingham. Professor Lees is awaited, and those will be published in due course on the inquiry website. And they set out certain responses to criticisms you've voiced. But I'm not going to, I know you understand, go into the he said, she said elements of some of those responses. In terms of the hepatitis C diagnosis given to you by Professor Lee in the way you've described, were you provided with any other information about hepatitis C, its prognosis or treatment at that time?
No. Just I didn't have to worry about it because I'd be dead.
You've expressed surprise in your statement that the issue of non-A, non-B hepatitis, as hepatitis C had previously been known, doesn't feature earlier in your records.
No.
So there are references to hepatitis B, I think in multiple places in your records, but you say not non-A, non-B.
No. And the thing I actually find it disturbing is that I was under the world famous Great Ormond Street Hospital, where children were flown in from all over the world to have this wonderful treatment. And I've got no criticism of the NHS and the care that I received on the front line. But within haemophilia, documentation and research papers that I've seen since as a campaigner, they're talking about little boys with cirrhosis of the liver from non-A, non-B. I then transferred over to the Royal Free, where they were researching hepatitis viruses and non-A, non-B, and there's no mention in either that of being tested. I would have also have thought, because of hepatitis B being as prevalent as it was, and as we've heard from other witness statements, you know, haemophiliacs turning yellow wasn't a rarity. So because they were aware of something, if you've got a severe haemophiliac who's there being injected virtually every other day, it's either negligence that you haven't tested, or you have tested and purged that information.
And had you known in 1991 that you were being tested for hepatitis C?
No, I didn't even know what it was.
Now, in terms of some of the observations you've made about your care at the Royal Free at that time in the years that followed, I just want to pick up a couple of themes from the evidence you've given in your statement. The first is this: you say that you weren't spoken to as a person in your own right or seen as a frightened young man, but were treated with hostility in an abrupt way and made to feel small, and that you couldn't ask questions. Is that right? That's how you felt?
Yes. What people, in my opinion, what people don't understand is that they see this young man who, has been given this death sentence, but I was still trying to embrace the life that I had. People have this assumption that if you've been born with a disability, then you're stupid. And actually, I'm far from stupid. And as a little boy, spending so much time in Great Ormond Street, I used to be sitting reading the biology manuals and books that the lab technicians were bringing in for me. And even at a very young age, I could tell you various different medical terms. So when I can speak to a doctor, look them in the eye and speak on their level and understand what they're saying, they lose a little bit of power, and it makes them a bit jittery. So, is this a problem?
The other theme that emerges from your evidence about the years in which you were under the care of the Royal Free is you believe that your sexuality or speculation about it played a part in the way in which you were treated.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, So in 1983, in preparation for the first knee operation I had, it was like a scene out of Carry On. You know, the surgeon would come in with his entourage and they would talk over the top of you and it all went on around you and yeah, good chap, and out he went. But then in my medical notes, he says, I'm a very bright, intelligent young man, I believe with homosexual tendencies. So at 14, you know, you're struggling with hormones but everything else going on in life. And okay, so he was right, but I don't understand why that had to be said. Why, if that was his suspicion, well, great, but why did it need to be put into my medical notes?
And you've said in your statement, there may be some debate about how often this has occurred, but you've said in your statement you've seen in your medical records references to your sexuality, which you say should have been irrelevant to the assessment care treatment that you were being given.
Yeah. On one occasion, I woke up one morning and I had all these warts come up on my face. And because working at the airport, obviously I needed to be clean shaven. So I using the electric shaver, tried gently to shave. And the following day, it was even worse. So I went to the hospital, and the referral letter that was sent to dermatology was, would you please see this homosexual man with AIDS?
You also more generally describe yourself during those teenage years and having received this diagnosis as hating yourself for being gay.
Yeah.
Because AIDS was seen as a gay plague, and somehow the infection of the haemophilia community was seen as the fault of the gays.
Yes.
And you ended up hating yourself for that.
Mm. They led me to believe. I've always known. I mean, when you're born different, but then there was something else that just didn't quite. I'm not going to say feel right. I knew that I was different, and I had a suspicion of what I thought it was. So I asked, are there any gay haemophiliacs? And I was told no. So if there weren't any gay haemophiliacs, but then I'd been given the gay plague, which was all across the newspapers and it was everywhere. The haemophiliacs were being connected with the gay community. That's why I'm feeling this way. And nobody did anything, would even speak to me about the way I was feeling, because they don't talk about that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I was led to believe it was the virus.
If we return to the mid-80s, and you'd left school age 16 in 1985, and you'd always been passionate about aeroplanes.
Yes.
And so you started work at Gatwick with British Airways through its youth training scheme.
Yes.
And you loved your job over the following years.
When people say, oh, living the dream, I said to my careers advisor that I wanted to work in aviation, and I'll never forget him. He said to me, they'll never look at someone like you. Get your head out of the clouds and think about working in a shop. So I said to him, I don't want to work in a shop. I want to work with aeroplanes. He just rolled his eyes, and it was like, well, why am I bothering? You know, because you're going to die, aren't you? So it's irrelevant what we're talking about. And then I went for an interview with Britannia Airways. I was given a position, and then the following day I was phoned, and they said that, they'd made a mistake and they'd actually taken on more people than they actually had spaces for. But she did just want to clarify one thing. I did have haemophilia, and what was haemophilia? So I explained it, and she said, she was very sorry, but it was lovely to meet me. So, not settling for that, I applied to British Airways. I went to Heathrow. I passed all the tests with flying colours, just which I could have done standing on my head. They were concerned about travelling from my home to Heathrow. So I said that I have family that lived near Gatwick. Did they have a scheme? They transferred my file down to Gatwick. I went down, saw the person who became my boss, and she said to me, what could you bring if we offered you the post? And I said, I would sweep the runway with a toothbrush just to be working with aeroplanes. That's how much this means to me. And she contacted Heathrow, and at that point the scheme had 12 people. It was only funded for 12, and I became number 13. They made the post for me. So she saw something in me.
And you've explained in your statement you worked there for a number of years, you loved it, but you were also living what you've described as a double life because you didn't dare tell people that you had HIV.
No. And every aspect of my life there was a connection with that, and there was too much fear because even there was a rumour went through British Airways that they were going to start testing cabin crew for HIV, but that could then go to ground staff as well. And because of the education, the narrative that was being put out, the connection with the gay community, I don't hide who I am. I know I'm as camp as a row of pink tents, but actually at British Airways, I was Mark, and the people saw me and embraced me and actually loved me. I'm still in connection with a lot of people.
We've got a photo from you from around this time, 1591009, please, Henry. This is you with a car that you were very proud of, I understand.
My first car bought with my wages from when I was taken on permanently. So that was, my Celica, my pride and joy.
And that's 1989, roughly.
Roughly, yeah.
In the course of the 1990s, your health started to deteriorate.
I had a car crash. I was on the M25 stationary and a car hit me at 60 mile an hour. And my dad always said, when I got this car, he didn't like it because it was too small. If you have a big car and you're in an accident, you've got all that bonnet, all that boot, it'll save your life. So that Celica actually went wrong, and I bought a Ford Granada. And when the fireman cut me out of it, the back doors came over the front, and it split the floor. I had to be cut out, and the fireman said that the reason I was alive was because it was a big, new, sturdy car. And that's what saved my life. So it sort of made me think about, again, your mortality's there. I've got all this stuff going on, but death could have hit me there and then.
But in 1995, you ended up rushed to hospital because you had CMV.
Yeah.
What can you recall about that illness and that time?
I'd gone into work, and I had, the only way I could describe it, it felt like I had an upset stomach. It just felt really queasy, but it was really warm, and also as I was breathing, it felt like it was quite tight, and I thought, oh, maybe I've just got a cold coming or something like that. But then my eyesight started going fuzzy, so I phoned Mum and said, I've got to go to the hospital because I don't feel well. So I actually left Gatwick on my shift, drove to my parents, and then Mum and Dad came down with me the following day, and literally within the hour I was diagnosed with CMV.
And you had ulcers in your eyes, lungs and stomach.
Yes.
Your CD4 count went down to almost 0.
Yeah.
And you thought you were going to die.
Professor Lee stood at the end of my bed, and I said to her, this CMV, how could I have got that? And she said, it's your homosexual lifestyle, which I couldn't quite understand, going out and listening to Kylie Minogue and you come up with a virus, I don't know. But Dad said that Professor Lee wanted me to stay in, and she explained to us that the ganciclovir treatment is very, very harsh. They would have to monitor me closely, but I possibly could have a matter of days to live. So my dad said, well, if that's the case, then my boy's coming home. And she said no. and you don't argue with my dad. My dad said, my mum's been doing my treatment since I was a little boy. If she can't connect a drip to a tube, then there's something wrong. But I don't care what you say, he's coming home. If he's going to die, he's coming home to die with us. And I went home.
And you, your weight dropped to 4.5 stone that time. You've said in your statement that later you found out that from 1993 to 1995 they'd been secretly testing you for CMV, which is why they were so quick to diagnose it when you were then admitted in late 95.
Yes.
What's the basis for your belief that you've been secretly tested?
In my medical notes, the treatment, the cards they filled out for the blood tests, each one had CMV on it, and there was loads of them. They're layered on pages, that just seemed like month after month. Also, again, with my tainted blood head on, I looked back and found research papers where Professor Lee had actually published research in 1995 at the same time that I had CMV. She published papers saying that the treatment, although it was heat treated, it only killed the hepatitis B, C and HIV, but pathogens like parvovirus B19 and CMV, it didn't kill. So the treatment was still dangerous. So, but we weren't being told that.
And you weren't aware that you had been tested for CMV?
No.
You recovered at home and started to improve, and you went back to work on reduced hours. But you then describe in your statement becoming ill later with a chest infection, and then being put on around the same time a combination of medication, including Septrin AZT by the Royal Free.
Yeah.
What were the side effects of the treatment that you received?
It was horrible. I mean, you can see my appearance is everything to me. This is what the world sees. When I joined British Airways, we were ambassadors for the airline, so you had to look good in your uniform. And in the days when we were the world's favourite airline, it was because people were dedicated to that and everything about your image. So I was so proud to wear that uniform, so I had to look immaculate. And then my hair started to fall out. My eyes started to become darker and my face... I could see the AIDS creeping up. I started to see in the mirror the pictures of those gay men dying on the AIDS wards. And I mean, the AZT, the feeling, it just... We've heard similar about how sort of the flu-like symptoms with the hepatitis C treatment. This just felt like somebody was kicking the crap out of you all the time, and it was just... You'd sort of go to the toilet, you'd walk out the door and then have to go back in, and I would spend hours just going to the toilet, and you think, well, how much more? But it was like everything was becoming dark, but then still trying to carry on working, because putting on this front, I was exhausted.
And you then had CMV again in 1997. And,
yeah, my right eye.
And your vision was affected, you've said in your statement, you think due to the HIV medication that you were receiving.
I was on a drug. I laid in the Royal Free, and Professor Lee came up, and she's a very cool character. She's very, very calmly spoken, but very firmly spoken. But she actually came up and looked quite flustered, and said, "We need to change your HIV medication, which is called ethambutol." And I'm connected to this machine with the ganciclovir going in. And I said, why? And she said, it's been causing crystallisation behind the eyes of patients, which has killed them because it's then caused a brain hemorrhage. And that isn't helpful with haemophilia. So I was then changed onto something else.
The new treatment that you received turned your urine bright red, and you say that made you think you were bleeding internally.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it was just, we need to change your medication. Bearing in mind, because of the narrative we've been told, right from the word go, we sat down and said about the HIV diagnosis, when asked, well, how did it happen, the narrative we were told was that because the blood was imported, homosexuals and drug addicts they'd taken the blood, and that's how it had accidentally got into us, because it had been come into the treatment that way. So it was a big accident. So when you wake up each day believing that you're a survivor of this awful accident, they could have said, stick your head in the oven, and I'd have done it, because I'd been groomed from a young age to do what I was told and respect what they said and who they were. So there wasn't any questions asked. It was just, we need to change. So, of course, the first time I went to the loo and it came out looking like Ribena, I was mortified. It was like, what do I do? Because, again, we can't just straight away take treatment, because it can destroy your kidneys. It can cause blockages. So, yeah, it was really frightening.
And you said it was when you went back to the hospital that you were told this was a standard side effect.
Yeah.
We've got 2 photos of you from the late 1990s, I think about 1998. Henry, could we first have 15910111? Do you want to tell us about this photo, Mark?
Well, you can see that beautiful little bundle of fluff there on my leg. That's my little Simba. And he was born in Birmingham Dogs Home. He left his mum in the morning, and I got him at lunchtime. And the reason that I got him, it was for my birthday, but basically by getting him gave me a reason to live. And I made a promise with my mum and dad that if I died, they would look after him. So I knew that he would be all right if I left him. But looking at that picture, you can see the face, but also you can see the shade of yellow that I am. Yeah, he gave me a reason to carry on.
And if we could then have, please, Henry, 15911010. What can you tell us about this photo?
I've been told that because my CD4 was so low that I had full-blown AIDS. And as you can see with the red and the white, it was actually an HIV charity AIDS dinner. And I believed it was probably going to be the last social event that I went to. And by going there, I wanted to show the people who were there that this is what an AIDS face looks like, but haemophilia AIDS face. The fact that I'm a gay man, it doesn't come into it. But I also wanted to try and raise some money and awareness for those that would be left behind after I was gone.
I'm not sure whether it was exactly around this time or not, but you can hopefully tell us that you had to have all your teeth removed.
The hospital they told me the ganciclovir was a really harsh drug, and that in itself, because of my weight, I from the age of 13 to the age of 40, I was 7.5 stone with a 26-inch waist. So any fluctuation in my weight, it sort of showed. I've always been thin. And they said with the ganciclovir that I would probably lose weight. Because I don't do nothing normally, I actually put weight on. So that was one thing that was good about it. But sorry, I lost my thread then.
It's asking you about the fact that you lost your teeth.
Oh, yeah. I bit into a sandwich and my tooth shattered, just completely severed off at the gum, but leaving the nerves exposed. So I went to the hospital, and they had to cut my gum to get the tooth out. Then this happened again, and by the time about the third or fourth tooth had shattered, trying to get appointments at the dentist or anything like that, it wasn't happening. You had to wait, so it meant that everything I ate, everything I drank, you've got these shattered teeth with the nerves just hanging there, and you couldn't do anything about it. And it was just, well, wait your turn. And it felt very much like they were reluctant to do anything quickly, because when you look like that, it was throwing money down sort of a dark hole. But it carried on. And at one point, I just saw it was she wasn't even a consultant, it was a registrar, a dental registrar. And she said that what they were planning was to take me in and remove 8 of my teeth under local anaesthetic. And we questioned that and said, hang on a minute, severe haemophilia with AIDS, there's an infection risk, but you've got a massive bleeding risk. Any dental work that I've had previously, I'd had done under general anaesthetic. But that's what they were going to pursue. So it was suggested we make a formal complaint, which we did. We got an apology, and they decided then that all of my teeth had to come out because that was the easiest option. So they took me in and removed my back teeth first. And then in the second operation, when I went in, they took the front ones. So they basically took away my smile as well.
And because your appearance was something that had mattered to you very much and mattered because of the work you did, that was something you found particularly difficult.
Yeah. I mean, how do you sit on a check-in desk, smile at a passenger and say, can I take your passport, please, or tickets and passport, smile, and you got your teeth all shattered? I mean, it was horrible.
You've said in your statement that it was during the second dental surgery that you were asked about doing a trial of Helix 8, but then you were placed back on Factor 8 products.
Yeah.
And you think it is the Factor 8 you received during that surgery that exposed you, as you subsequently learnt, to a risk of variant CJD?
Yeah. The trial for Helix 8, I was asked, because I'd had the back teeth out, and it was pretty horrible, because I mean, imagine all of this was just swollen up. I was bruised, I had black eyes, and I looked like I'd been beaten up. I wasn't pretty at all. And they said that would I consider, when I had the front ones done, the Helix 8 trial, because the children had the Helix 8 licensed for single infusion only. They didn't have the licence for continuous infusion for surgery. So if I agreed to do the trial, that would help with the licensing process for the kids. And being in that state, of course, I wanted to do something for the next generation. What they could learn, or what we could achieve, would protect the kids. So I agreed. I had my teeth taken out. The following day, I was sitting up eating Rice Krispies. There was no bleeding. It was actually brilliant. It really was fantastic. I had no pain. Because I was on the trial, I had to stay in hospital for the week to complete that course. As far as I'm aware, that when that then ended, all the paperwork was sent off, and yet the licence was gained, obviously. But then they put me straight back on the old stuff that Professor Lee had already said was dangerous. So you've got someone with full-blown AIDS who is being put back onto treatment by a consultant that's already said it's dangerous. And another research document was put out, and it was talking about, again, life-threatening parvovirus B19 in immunocompetent haemophiliacs. So I can't understand why they had me on this safe synthetic treatment that was licensed for single use. I was on demand treatment. I wasn't on prophylaxis. Why I couldn't have stayed on that. Then looking back, the batch number they gave me in the biggest haemophilia unit in the country, I'd had this one particular batch in the first operation, and then when they put me back onto it after the Helix 8 trial, it was the same batch. And we're talking, I think one was February and one was September. So they'd kept that batch for 8 months, which then became flagged up.
You describe in your statement a loss of trust in the medical profession and in the Royal Free, and how you started to rely more on information from the LGBT community about HIV and the available treatments for HIV.
Yeah. I was going out on the gay scene and became friends with, well, actually various different people, but one of the guys that I became very good friends with worked at GAY, which was then the biggest gay and lesbian club in the country. And I actually got on all right with the promoter, and he offered me a job, which I did. So I would be stood on the door as my official title was door whore. Everybody who came in, I had to take their tickets, and when the acts came to the stage door, I would take them to their dressing rooms. If they wanted anything, got it for them. Made a fuss, back to the front of house. So I was the person that was the link between the staff and the public, and the acts, and it was great. But then when we did, say, charity fundraising events, so for Crusade, Gay Men Fighting AIDS, and then THT, one of the guys who came down was actually a friend of the Terence Higgins, and he was the first person that I told that I'd got HIV, but as a haemophiliac, and when I was telling him things that I was being told, he was horrified. And so he would come down to the club fairly regularly, and if there was a leaflet or something like that, he would bring down, and he was giving that to me. When I then went to the hospital, armed with this bit of paper and all this leaflet, I had the information, and I would ask them about it, and then I'd be told completely the opposite. One day, I even took one of the papers in because it was saying that there was new hope of a medication in America, and Professor Lee wouldn't even look at it because it was a gay publication. She wouldn't touch it.
In 1998, your care transferred to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham because you moved to the Birmingham area.
I moved to Birmingham, but my primary care stayed at the Royal Free. But I was registered at both, so everything still went through the Royal Free, and I was still travelling down to the Royal Free for reviews. But if I needed treatment or anything, I could go to the QE, which happened a couple of times. I fell down the stairs, so I was admitted to the QE.
And then I think it was in 2000, whilst you were on holiday in Gran Canaria, you began to feel ill. And when you came home, you were taken into hospital in Birmingham.
In the Royal Free.
In the Royal Free, my apologies. And you were told you had a lesion on the right motor cortex of your brain that had caused the bleed.
Mum came with me to the hospital and I collapsed. They did an MRI and I lost the use of my left arm, and they told me I'd had a stroke, but there was a lesion on the on the motor cortex part of my brain, and it was this lesion that had caused this stroke, and that's what meant I lost the use of my arm. I was laying in the bed. Mum was sat beside me, and I don't even know who this doctor was. He was, again, I think just a registrar. Came up and said that they'd reviewed the imaging, and I had what was called JC virus, otherwise known as PML, but he said JC virus. And he said basically what that would do is, as it spreads, it goes a cobweb across your brain. So as it goes across your brain, depending on which part of the brain it affects first, it will shut that part of the brain down. So you could lose your sight, could lose your speech. He said you could just stop breathing. But he said basically what the prognosis is, you will end life connected to life support as a vegetable. So go home, get your affairs in order. You've got weeks, not months. So that's what I did.
And you, I think you say in your statement, it was then that your care was transferred to Birmingham.
Yeah, because I couldn't drive.
And it was when you returned home from the hospital after this admission that there was a letter waiting for you about potential exposure to variant CJD.
Yeah. So when I had been medically retired from British Airways. When British Airways, I had to come clean about my infection because I was being blackmailed by somebody. They were told that I had full-blown AIDS, and then basically they couldn't get rid of me quick enough. They shuffled me up to Heathrow, then on 12-hour shifts, so my health plummeted even more. No matter how much I tried, I just, on AZT and everything, just couldn't cope with it. So they called me in and said I had an ultimatum that I could take medical retirement, or the next time I went sick, they would fire me. And because I love British Airways so much, I took medical retirement because I was still on the payroll. I was still part of the world's favourite airline. So it was. I forgot what I was going to say again. Sorry.
Well, it was asking you about how when you returned home from this particular admission that you received the VCJD notification.
So because of all this that was going on with the medical retirement, I suppose I was shutting off. You know, when somebody tells you that you know you're going to die from something else, and whether it be CJD, JCB, JC, whatever it be, it was what he'd said to me in the hospital was JC virus. You come home and there's a letter saying CJD. I put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5, thinking that's what I had. And, well, I was still going to die from this brain virus, whatever it was. But he did make reference that it was similar to BSC.
And you sold your car and you made other preparations for your death.
Yeah, Mum came up to look after me because with not being able to use my arm, I couldn't cook, I couldn't dress myself, I couldn't bathe myself. Mum was dressing me and doing everything for me. We were going through paperwork that needed to be destroyed. Sold the car, and it was just preparing to die. All I really wanted to do was just watch the television. I just wanted to watch cartoons. I'm sure you're going to get onto it, but I contacted the McFarlane Trust and asked for a grant to have Sky Telly because I didn't know how long I had, but all I wanted to do was, like I say, just watch Disney films. Just lay there and wait because it was going to happen. I gave up. And they said no because it was a luxury item. So my mum paid for the installation of the Sky for me.
You said in your statement it was not long after this that you met Mark Simmons, who we've heard from other witnesses was a social worker attached to the haemophilia unit at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. And you say he was able to educate you about health issues and treatment issues in a way that the doctors had never been able to do.
Yeah, I had a connection with him. And he spoke to me as a person because of his background as a social worker, but specialising in HIV. He'd actually flown out to New York when the AIDS epidemic first hit. So he was out in New York setting up support counselling and things like that and helping AIDS victims in New York. And my understanding is that a group of his friends, they decided to return back to the UK to become social workers rather than being, say, activists on the outside. By coming on the inside, they could help more people. So his knowledge was fantastic. There was no judgment, and because of what's happened, I don't trust anybody. But Mark Simmons is one of the very few people that I can say I would trust with my life.
And he, you say, instilled your rebellious side, and you started to fight a bit more and question what you were being told by doctors.
Yeah, because of his background. We sat and we talked about things, and yeah, the prognosis at that point in time was bleak. It was horrible, you know. Death is there, but he said, well, if you are going to die, at the moment you're living on this tiny BA pension. You're not on benefits or anything, because in between my bouts of illness, I always went and got another job, because that's what you do. So I was living on my McFarlane Trust money and this, like I say, my pension. But he said, let's start the process to get you benefits. If you die, then nothing's lost. But if you don't die, even if it's 50 quid or whatever it is, it's still a bit extra for you and it will help you. So that's what we did. We applied. And that was the beginning of another nightmare.
Well, I'll come on to benefits at a later stage and your experiences in that regard. You were placed on a new medication regime by Dr. Wild at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. He stopped the medication that you'd been given by the Royal Free and put you on a different regime, and you started to feel slightly better.
Yeah, Dr. Wild actually tested my blood because he couldn't understand the yellow colour and, you know, how ill I was. He had my blood tested and he couldn't believe how toxic it was. And basically what happened was the Royal Free just kept adding medication. They weren't taking anything away. It was just adding and adding and adding. And it was just all building up in my system. So he completely stopped everything, completely changed it. He did contact the Royal Free saying about my abnormal liver function test, and they said, it's probably his HIV meds. That's what prompted him to look at the toxicity in my blood.
In 2003, you met Richard on another holiday
Yep.
in Gran Canaria, and you've been together ever since.
Yeah.
And
Can I tell you about that?
yes. Well, I think you might want to ask Richard rather than me that question.
I'd gone on holiday with my friend who had never been to Gran Canaria before, and at this point in time, still, this had sort of settled down, the brain stuff. I was heavily medicated. I'd got the use of my arm back, and yeah, things weren't brilliant, but I was on a level, and anything to go on an aeroplane, I'd drag myself on an aeroplane. I think, you know, put me on one in a coma, I'd be there. But so my friend said, let's go to Gran Canaria, which we did, and on the night Richard and I met, my friend had been stood up. So I was comfortable with the fact that someone like me wouldn't meet anybody. I went out clubbing and I was out with my friends, not to try and meet anyone, but I just enjoyed the time. I loved the dancing and I loved the clubbing life, and yeah, just having a good time with my friends. That's all I wanted. So nothing else really mattered. So I was being all cynical and saying, it's Gran Canaria, don't worry about it. You know, the people just come here for a laugh and nothing serious happens. So we went into this particular bar, and it was famous because at a certain point in the night, the manager would come bring props out. So he would play on this big telly clips of musicals. So like the marriage scene from The Sound of Music, he would have a bride's veil that went all the way around the bar, and everybody had to wear it. And it was just a lot of laughter, a lot of fun. So this particular moment, I was wearing a pink hat, a bonnet, banging a tambourine, singing "High on a Hill Was a Lonely Goat Herder," as you do. And as I looked, all the people sat at the bar here sat back, and stood under this light at the end was this man laughing. I was like, "So what you laughing at?" And of course he couldn't hear, so he came down, and as he put his hand on my back and said, "What did you say?" I honestly felt like I'd been electrocuted. And I said to him, "What are you laughing at?" And he just looked at the bonnet, and that was it. I fell in love with him that minute, bang.
You moved to Brighton to live with Richard in 2004, and so your care transferred back to the Royal Free. I'm just going to put up a photo. It's 1591012, I think, Henry. This is you and Richard, and there's a story behind this photo as well.
I was a volunteer at the Terence Higgins Trust, and for that year, they asked me to organise the entry into Birmingham Gay Pride for THT. So that's why I'm in the silver and the purple, because they're the THT colours, and we were all in costumes. And Richard, well, I'd met Richard literally, I think it was 2-3 weeks before that, a month. And he came along because they'd forecast rain. It come to spend Pride with us, but he carried the umbrella so my feathers didn't get wet. It's love.
Can I ask you, Mark, about certain aspects of your health in the years since then? You've described in your statement having first-stage renal failure, which you learnt was caused by a previous HIV medication regime.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
I'd noticed something in my medical notes because there was trust issues. I was looking at my medical notes to see what I could find out, and I noticed there was a line that Professor Lee had written, and it said "no bladder issues at present." And then all of a sudden I did start to get problems, and I had my HIV care now in the Ian Charleston Centre, which is the HIV unit, under the care of Professor Margaret Johnson, and they'd been sort of switching medications and things, and then one day she came in, and I was complaining of a pain down here. And so she did some tests, and she came back in and said, "Well, you've got renal failure. You've got first-stage renal failure." So they sent me for some tests, and basically they said it was I think it was called tenofovir. So they needed to take me off the tenofovir and put me onto something else. And then a little while later, I'd spoken to Professor, because this pain just wasn't getting any better. I knew there was something wrong. And I kept asking him, could I see somebody? And he wouldn't refer me. In the end, I nagged so much that he did do a referral. And in the letter, he says that he's tried to dissuade me, but I'm very persuasive or something. But I was adamant I needed to see someone. So we went and saw a urologist. The test that they did was you have to go into a room and you have to go to the loo through a machine, and then it does a printout. And when I went back in, Richard sat there with him. He never said a word to Richard. When the nurse gave him the readout, the colour drained from his face, and he said, "We need to get urgent tests. I'm going to refer you to nuclear medicine immediately. This suggests that you've got a blockage, and with your haemophilia, if the kidney ruptures, it will kill you." So I think that was on the Thursday. On the Monday, I was in nuclear medicine, pumped full of radioactive dyes and things, and yeah, my right kidney had shriveled up. The left kidney apparently had nodules all over it, was deformed, but I think the right kidney's working on about 16%.
And some treatment that you were given in relation to the renal problems that you were on, you've described as treatment that sucked all the life out of you. You became very depressed from the specific medication that you were given.
Yeah, he prescribed me this tablet. It was 1 tablet a day, and I had to take it for a month. And what he'd said was that the tube leading from my bladder had got a kink in it, or it was narrowed. So this tablet would basically relax that and help me go to the toilet. Well, it didn't, but it was literally like sitting in a room with somebody turning down the dimmer switch. The colour and everything started to drain. And yeah, each day it just got worse and worse. And because the relationship Richard and I have, although I tried to protect him as much as possible, I needed to tell him, and I do tell him how I'm feeling, because if something went wrong here, he could tell the doctors what was happening. I stuck it out for the month, and yeah, I really got to the end of the month, and I just couldn't care less about anything. You could have said I won the lottery, and yeah, whatever. I really didn't care. And then each day after, the colour started to come back, and I could feel my mood lifting. I then went back and saw the urologist. He then said that he would give me another tablet. Try this one, but this one should have different effects. So nothing happened. To be honest, I then forgot about it. I think it was about 6 months later, the local pharmacy delivered this tablet to our front door, and like all people should, I read the leaflet. And it said, if you're taking this medication, you mustn't take this drug. And there was my HIV medication on it. So rather than just saying, well, I'm not going to take it, I phoned the pharmacist to clarify, was this right? She got all upset because she hadn't prescribed it. I was to speak to the GP. The GP got upset because he'd been asked by the Royal Free to prescribe it. And when I contacted the Royal Free to say, I'm not supposed to be on this drug, it turns out that the drug he'd put me on previously, the HIV medication I was taking, causes other medications to back up. So that's why everything was getting dark, was because my toxicity was going up and up and up. I was overdosing.
Treatment for hepatitis C. I wanted to ask you about that. There came a stage at which you were advised to try interferon.
Yes.
What can you tell us about what then ensued?
Whilst I was in Birmingham, because of the trust I had with Mark Simmons, we would speak. He would come round to the house as a social worker to do his job. But the other thing was he would say things that he was seeing in the community. So if there was a piece of information I needed to know about the McFarlane Trust, he would tell me that as well. And it had been suggested by the Royal Free before the brain incident that I go on to interferon. So because my trust with Mark, I said to him, they've said about this, what do you know about it? And he said to me, obviously I can't medically advise you, but he said, what I've been seeing, it's horrendous. Mark, I honestly don't feel that you're psychologically strong enough, and certainly not physically. Bearing in mind, as I say, I was 7.5 stone, and he said the first thing that happens when you go on interferon is you lose about 1.5 stone in weight. So that would take me back down to about 5 stone, 5.5-ish. And because of all this other stuff going on, it was affecting my mental health, definitely. I'd lost my dreams, they'd ripped out my smile, been told, all this stuff was going on. So he said to me, if you can stay off it as long as possible, I understand that there's research into newer medications coming along. If they say you need it to save your life, then you've got to make that decision. But by staying off it as long as possible, it might help you.
So you didn't take interferon?
No.
There was then a point in time at which you had a consultation, I think, with a gastrologist.
Yep.
In 2007. You were asked what treatment you'd taken, and you said none. And then, what did the doctor say to you?
Well, it was the day before the Archer inquiry started, and so she was going through what medications I was on for my HIV, and she said, and what medication have you taken for hepatitis C? So I said, none. So she went, oh, so it went away all by itself, did it? I'm like, no. So she said, it says here, non-detectable. I said, no, that's my HIV. I've had non-detectable viral load. It's stable for ages now. That's under control. So she said, I know what hepatitis C is. So she said, oh, we'll test you. So they tested me, and it came back negative. But 2 years prior to that, my poor old knee finally gave up, and I had a total knee replacement in January of 2005. The whole time I was in hospital, I was really ill. They tested me for anything and everything. I was having fevers, and they couldn't get to the bottom of it. I had a high-ish viral load for my hepatitis C, and then all of a sudden they discharged me. Now, unbeknown to me, because having this major surgery, you're backwards and forwards to the hospital all the time, and they're taking review bloods and things. They had tested me in April of 2005 for hepatitis C, and it had come back negative, but I wasn't informed. So between April of 2005 and December of 2005, I'd been backwards and forwards to the hospital 9 times, and nobody had mentioned anything. So there was all these opportunities to tell me. Nobody said anything. Then a letter was sent to my GP in December of 2005 stating Mark's chronic hepatitis C infection, which has led to cirrhosis. The letter was sent because we then discussed changing my HIV medication because the toxicity on my liver, which I agreed to. The other thing that socially, because meeting Richard, I wasn't going out clubbing, and I now had somebody to live for, and I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking. I can't remember how many times I went into a nightclub after that because I wanted to spend as much time as I could with Richard. So I changed my whole life. And then in 2006, I went and had a scan, an ultrasound. And when you work on the door of the biggest gay and lesbian club in the country, you get to know a few people. And it just so happens that when I walked in, the guy who was doing the ultrasound had come into the club a number of times. Hello, darling, how are you? So he was there, recognised me, and he did the ultrasound. And as he was doing it, he showed me on the screen this bright white line on my liver, and he explained that was the damage to my liver. He explained how your liver goes like a piece of leather in the sun, it goes hard. So he was recommending that I be ultrasound or have scans every 6 months to keep an eye on the deterioration. I then saw, I was then seen in a joint haemophilia hepatitis clinic, and again, I was told that I needed to go on to interferon now. They were getting good results of 50% clearance. I have a very hypoechoic liver, and although the interferon would cause upset and trouble in my life, they believed it was worthwhile. So go home, speak to your partner, and it can be arranged. And I didn't need to have a biopsy. I could go straight onto treatment. So I went home. Richard and I discussed it, and because of haemophilia friends that I knew who were having trouble with the interferon, and it you know, people talk. And so I said, I don't want to go on to this. And Mark Simmons was still ringing in my ears. I didn't want to go on the treatment. So I didn't. I declined. And I was told by a chap called Dr. Very similar to what we just heard. Well, if you don't want my help, get out. So I got up and walked out.
And you've said in your statement that you, to this day, no one's explained how it is you managed to clear the virus without treatment after being infected for so long.
No.
And you still have a fear that it's somehow lying dormant.
Yeah, well, because of having over 30 years of chronic infection, being told you've got cirrhosis, and then all of a sudden the gastrologist saying, well, no, you haven't even got hepatitis C, I can tell you that fried my brain, because I'd literally just not long before been given the stage 1 Skipton Fund payment because I had a viral load, and then in the course of literally a couple of months, I had a viral load in hospital February when I was discharged. April, it's disappeared. Nobody says a word. 2 years later, I find out that they were trying to make me go on to treatment I didn't need for something I didn't have. And then nobody would talk to me because I didn't have hepatitis C. That was it. The shutters came down. If I mentioned hepatitis C, it was, well, you haven't got it.
I wanted to ask you both now about the psychological effects of everything you've described. You've, Mark, have talked in your statement of difficulty sleeping, panic and anxiety attacks, and I think you've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and a phobic anxiety disorder.
Yes.
Richard, what's your perspective of the mental, emotional, psychological effects on Mark and how he has been over the years and still is?
I see a counsellor too, and have done for 12 years, thereabouts, of the 16 that we've been together. The effects are, I mean, I can see when Mark starts, and my best description is spinning up, that he's getting into one of these anxiety states. There's nothing I can do. I have to wait for it to run its course, for Mark to be able to bring himself out of it, because I can't reach him in that moment. And it's at the point now that when the post arrives in the morning, if I see DWP, EIBSS, Macfarlane Trust as was then, on any of the envelopes, I know we're in for there's a fair chance we're in for a day. And it's not going to be nice. It's not going to be a pleasant day.
You said in your statement that there have been 3 or 4 occasions when Mark has walked out of the house with the intention of leaving and letting nature take its course.
Yes.
You've talked about an occasion where you went looking for help and you sat in A&E at the Royal Sussex County Hospital waiting for the on-call mental health specialist. What can you tell us about that occasion?
I can't think of an easier way of wasting an evening. It was just horrible. Mark had been in this for a day. We thought let's try and find some help, and we went to A&E. We were left in the waiting room for hours on end on a Sunday night, as the drunks were starting to come in. I think we'd sat there for a couple of hours, and I went to find someone and said, is there a chance that we're actually going to get to see somebody here? Oh, the person you need to see is not even in the hospital yet. We don't know where they were. I didn't bother asking. I went and told Mark this, and right, let's go home. And we went home and looked after each other. That was all we could do.
You've recalled another occasion when Mark didn't want to get out of bed. He was very low. He planned to stop taking his treatment and let his health decline naturally until the end.
Yes.
And you describe how your job takes you away from home. You build radio stations for special events.
That's right, yeah.
And you can be home for a few nights at a time. And it's when you go away that you're particularly worried about
Yeah,
Mark.
absolutely. There have been a couple of summers. Summer's my busy time, and there have been a couple of summers where almost from sort of the middle of June to the end of August, we've been ships in the night. I've been home for a night and off I go again somewhere else, and you know, from a working point of view, it's great. I'm self-employed, but it seems to be always those times when one of those letters turns up, and I'll ring Mark in the evening. I'll try and ring him every evening if I can. One of those letters turns up, and Mark hasn't spoken to anyone all day, and he's still spinning. And we'll have an hour or 2 hour phone call where at the end of it, thankfully, we're both calm enough to go on with that I don't need to go home.
You've said also in your statement, Richard, that Mark has been made to feel throughout his life that his illness is something to be ashamed of.
Yes. Yeah, that's with the effects that we've had from, and it comes from Mark's early diagnoses of his HIV, the gay plague. The medical, or we've talked about compassion here often enough. It's a recurring theme in these sessions, as far as I can tell. That medical professionals who will defend themselves to their dying day, and I expect them to do that, and think they're the most compassionate people on earth, are actually not communicating it to the people sat in front of them. That however much they might think they understand, they don't. I won't sit here and tell you I'm an expert in haemophilia. I'm not. I'm an expert in living with a haemophiliac, and one in particular. I think I've probably got quite good at it over the years.
The counselling that you both have separately, I understand is counselling that the two of you have arranged yourselves rather than something that was offered to you by the NHS.
Yeah.
Nothing really was offered to us, certainly not to me. I had to go and find my own.
Mark, you've been involved in campaigning activities and other work for many years, and there are just, you've spoken of a number of them in your statement. There are just 3 aspects of that I wanted to ask you about now. First is you produced a booklet called You Don't Have to Be Straight to Take Factor 8. And that was designed to offer advice and support to men with haemophilia who identified as gay or who might be questioning their sexuality. And you wanted to produce that because they might be going through what you'd gone through when you thought you were alone, that you were the only gay haemophiliac.
Yes. It actually, I think it was an alignment of the planets, because there was a few of us the same time contacted the Haemophilia Society and asked, was there any information or could they tell us anything about if there were gay haemophiliacs? And because of us making the calls individually, obviously, at that time, the person at the Haemophilia Society then said it was something that obviously needed to be addressed, looked into, and would we consider forming this little group so that we could do something about it, which is what we did. So we got together with Mark Simmons' help and the Haemophilia Society. That booklet was produced. It was then to coincide with, there was the patient booklet, but we also had a staff leaflet so that if somebody went into the haemophilia centre and said, I think I might be gay, they could refer to this leaflet. If they weren't comfortable with the conversation, they could then pass it on to somebody who could talk, and that would, we were hoping it would be one of us, or something then would grow with the Haemophilia Society along those lines. The booklet was then, where it was published, it was sent to all the English-speaking countries. It went to Hong Kong and places like that. And then in 2004, I was flown out to Bangkok to give a presentation to the World Federation of Haemophilia Congress, raising the issue of that there was this stigma that, well, you know, if you've got medical professionals telling you there are no gay haemophiliacs, and you're sitting in a reception like what happened, and one goes skipping past you, it made you question, and we were constantly being denied. And throughout that booklet, there are statements from each one of us where doctors or nurses had said something that we didn't exist. So being made to feel the way that I was made to feel, I don't want anybody to ever feel that way again, and that's why we said that there was a need for it. Sadly, after the Congress in Bangkok, the whole project got dropped. And I will add that some hospitals really embraced it. So the QE in Birmingham, they really embraced it. And Dr. Wild, I give him his due, he was so supportive of being fully inclusive. Whereas on the flip side, the Royal Free, they wouldn't even have the booklet in the Haemophilia Centre. This was a Haemophilia Society publication, but Professor Lee wouldn't have it in the centre, and they all disappeared.
The second aspect I've been going to ask you about was the presentation you gave to the World Federation of Haemophilia Congress. So you've answered that already. The third aspect of activity that I wanted to ask you about was your participation in the DWP Working Party. As I understand it, that was about trying to ensure that the DWP understood better the degenerative and crippling effects of haemophilia and the additional components for those haemophiliacs who also are infected with HIV or hepatitis C. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, yeah. Because, as we touched on earlier, because Mark Simmons had said, let's get you benefits or let's apply for benefits, because where I'd medically retired from BA and not applied immediately, the DWP placed me onto the wrong benefit. They placed me onto income support. And it just caused a nightmare. I was constantly being reviewed and having to justify why I was still alive. It was fight for everything. And actually that fight went on for 7 years. It was only when we were living down in Brighton, our local MP, the election changed to a Conservative. We went and saw him. He looked into it, and the investigation was triggered by the chief executive of the Job Centre Plus, and they found out, oh yeah, guess what, you are on the wrong benefit. But leading up to that, the thing that actually was the catalyst was that I'd spoken to somebody at the DWP on the telephone, and bearing in mind my PTSD, as Richard's pointed out, the DWP is a trigger. When a letter comes through, it's fear. I can't describe that feeling. We go away on holiday. When we come back, it's that brown envelope. It's every single time. It's like somebody punches you in the guts, and it's like, oh, here we go again. So I'd phoned up and spoken to the caller handler, who put a supervisor on and said to me, I need to clarify something with you. Do you really have AIDS, or is it only HIV? So I said to her, well, actually, no, I've had AIDS long before there was any treatment because of this. It infected as a child, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Right, well, let me spell this out to you. You are not ineligible. Do you understand? Not entitled. So I put the phone down because I thought, I'm not going to swear. I won't give them benefit. Well, I then got the recordings. I wrote to the data protection manager and officer and got the recordings, provided those to my MP, our MP, and I think it was in about 2 weeks. I had a cheque for £20,000, the backdated money that I should have had, and then I was given an ex gratia payment of £2,000 for all the distress and upset caused that was completely unnecessary. And then
Which you were promptly taxed on.
Which they taxed me on, yeah. And then about 6 months down the line, they decided they were going to change the benefits, and I had to go through the whole process of applying again for ESA. Over the years, with the Haemophilia Society and everything, I've tried to work with the DWP, and then when this working party was set up for contaminated blood, I spoke to the Haemophilia Society and became part of it, but I will never be rude to anybody intentionally. I never try to say anything to cause offence. But if you think I'm stupid, then you're the stupid one, because I don't take prisoners. And we sat in there with the chief policy writer, who was telling us all this stuff. And when I challenged him that severe haemophiliacs, super infected with multiple viruses, were being assessed and not getting 1 point, how did that even work? How is that even possible? And he denied it was happening. So I can think of at least 6 people right now. I'm telling you it's happening. What are you going to do about it? Long story short, it made them do an internal investigation, and it appears that they were assessing haemophiliacs but not taking into account the hemarthropathy, the actual thing that causes the disability. Everything that they've known all over the years all seems to have been thrown out the window. And when we asked how that protocol was passed, or how was that even put into place, that these people could be assessed and not take into account that main effect, might as well talk to that desk. They just clammed up, didn't want to know. But we made them pay back £1.8 million to people. We got people's benefits reinstated. We got people uplifted. And then they closed the thing down. They're not talking to us. But on the flip side of that again, it's been brought to my attention recently that there has been a real targeting of the haemophilia community, contaminated blood victims especially. And I think out of all of the people who sit around the table, most have had their benefits put into review, even to the point where mine was thrown into review the day after I came back from Cardiff.
You've summed it up this way in your statement in terms of interaction with the DWP, that you constantly have to justify your illness and poor health, and you are not believed in anything you say.
No.
We've touched on aspects of the Macfarlane Trust, and you talk about them further in your statement. One point I particularly wanted to ask you was, and this is for you or Richard, really, you'd asked for Richard to be officially recognised by the Macfarlane Trust as your partner.
Yes.
And what happened in relation to that?
They refused.
And why did they refuse?
Because the deeds didn't allow it.
Because you were same-sex partners?
Yes. It was set up for wives or girlfriends.
Eventually, you did get them to add Richard or identify Richard as your partner.
When you threaten them with legal action and you've got fantastic people on the inside like Mark Simmons fighting your corner, he showed them the error of their ways and they accepted Richard, and I got the fantastic sum of £5 a month extra because I had someone in my life.
You've observed in relation to EIBSS as follows. You say it's difficult to get anything from EIBSS because they make you try numerous other organisations first and people just give up and don't bother applying, is your perspective?
Yep. The EIBSS basically has taken...
That started with the Macfarlane Trust. And as far as I can tell, they've just continued the same way of working, that whatever you ask for, the answer's no, until you've almost got to sort of arm lock them and march them to the bank to make them pay you.
The Macfarlane Trust treated people, just we've heard, with complete and utter contempt. But for us, it was every time they would they changed the trust deeds, we had to fight for recognition because we weren't automatically carried forward. And one example of that was that the Macfarlane Trust sent out letters to beneficiaries stating that there was a charity that had been set up for widows of haemophiliacs infected with HIV, whose husbands had haemophilia infected with HIV, called, I think it's the Honeywell Trust. And if any widows wanted to apply for a grant, this trust was there also for grants. So if somebody wanted to learn how to use a computer or learn to drive after their husband had died, they could apply to this trust. So I called the Macfarlane Trust and said, I got this letter, does that apply to everybody? And she said, what do you mean everybody? And I said, well, where's the male partners? And, oh, no, this is for widows. So, right, so if I die tomorrow, my husband isn't going to suddenly turn into a woman and become a widow, is he? So where is the support for him? Well, there isn't any. So that's clear discrimination then. No, you're not. You're missing the point. This is for the widows whose husbands have died, for them to get support. I completely understand what a widow is, and I'm asking you, as a gay man with a male husband, where does he go on my death? And there isn't anywhere, so they couldn't tell me. So I said, could I speak to Jan Barlow, the chief executive? And she said no, she wouldn't speak to me. And the whole time Jan Barlow was in post, I never spoke one word to the woman. She refused to speak to me. Don't know why. I think she was just jealous of my looks. But so I insisted that I spoke to Jan Barlow, and she wouldn't. So I said, all right, okay, if this is the way you want to play it, I'll see you. So I'm going to put the phone down now. I'm calling the police, and I'm going to have you arrested for homophobic abuse and discrimination, because you are discriminating against my husband and me because we're gay men. Put the phone down. And I was like this. And I thought, how dare they? I was so angry that they were treating Richard, not me. I didn't care about me, but he. What support does he get? Oh, nothing, because he's a man. And then I got this text come through from a friend who was a trustee saying, from now on, the term widows will apply to male and females. So I text back and said, well, this doesn't resolve the issue of the Honeywell Trust. All I want to do is speak to Jan. And she wouldn't do it. She never spoke a word to me. I didn't call the police because I actually thought, do I really need any more hassle? Things were winding up, and then EIBSS basically picked the Macfarlane Trust up from 20 years ago, dumped it down, and of all its bad, horrible, discriminatory ways, just enforced it, but worse. And you had to go, as we've heard, you have to go. My car, my DLA car, was up for renewal last year. I spoke to the Macfarlane Trust to apply for the grant that I've always been eligible for every 3 years, and they said, no, you've got to now apply to the Motability charity for a grant. if they give you any money, you have to notify EIBSS. If they turn you down, you have to notify EIBSS. Then you have to apply to EIBSS, and then they consider it. But after all that's been said and done, the maximum payment would be, if they allowed it, £500. So I spoke to Motability. They knew nothing about this. They said that no, I didn't meet the criteria. So I then re-spoke to EIBSS, and they said, well, we need that in writing. I got that in writing, sent the email to them, and never heard anything more. So I actually thought, right, I'm not going to pursue this, because it's energy that I don't have to waste. But where I look after my car went back, and then you get the bonus for looking after your car, which was £500. So it was like, I didn't need EIBSS. But they have also made life hell, because with the hassle I've had at the Royal Free, they hold the information on my hepatitis C infection. I see them as my abusers. They have caused me so much distress and upset that I cannot go and sit in a room with them and ask them to help me fill out an application form to go in front of people who wouldn't, extinguish me if I was on fire. And I wrote to them, the chief executive I wrote to, saying that I'm in this awkward situation, that a criminal investigation took place, the Metropolitan Police were involved. I see them as my abusers, so I can't access that information to support my SCM application. And they've just said, well, if you can't come up with the goods, we ain't paying you. So I don't get the money.
But Richard, can I ask you just a couple of further matters arising out of your statement? We've heard about you being treated differently in terms of the trusts, because you are a male partner rather than a female partner. But you've also said in your statement you feel that in terms of Mark's interactions with the medical profession over the years and all the ways he's described, you've also been treated differently in that respect. You're not acknowledged. It's almost as if you're invisible.
Completely, yeah. Oh, even down to the first time I went with you to any, or with Mark to any appointment, was at Birmingham. And the consultant swept into the room, asked me to leave, and that was that. There was no. I think at the time, I was so surprised. I just went, okay, yep, and off I went. Went and stood in the corridor for 15 minutes. But that was the recurring theme: is that I've either been ignored. Even if I've been sat next to Mark, I've been introduced as Mark's partner, Mark's husband. And it's only when Mark's moved his care more recently to St Thomas's that a consultant turned to me and said, "Now, Richard, what do you think about that?" And I'm expected to have an opinion now. It was a complete shock to me to be asked. So in all the time that Mark and I have been going to his appointments together at the Royal Free, my opinion has never been sought, never mattered.
When we sat with the urologist, and he said about the blockage, afterwards, when that settled down, he sat with Richard beside me, and he said he talked to us about maybe doing an operation on me, and he said, if you and your wife have finished having children, we can perform this operation. So I said no.
And Richard, you've made some suggestions in your statement for improvement, and I just wanted to ask you about two of those suggestions. The first is training in bedside manner for healthcare professionals. I wondered if there was anything else you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the compassion thing we mentioned earlier, that we've seen it often enough, and I'm sure other people here have done too. A consultant turns up like some sort of knight on a white charger with his entourage behind him, As Mark has said, they talk over your head, they talk over my head, and off they go again. And that for me is not an acceptable way of behaving in this day and age. This is the 21st century after all. That I think, I can't remember who it was, we were talking to somebody, I think the line they said was "not about me without me." And I think it was somebody at the Haemophilia Society who said it at the London Zoo thing. If consultants can't engage with a homosexual couple, or any other couple for that matter, they're kind of missing the point. They're in the wrong place. They may be very bright, they may know their stuff medically, but you've also got to be able to deal with people. And that's my point.
And the other point I wanted to ask you about in your statement was you suggest it would be a good thing if organisations like the DWP and EIBSS were to change the language that they use. What did you mean by that?
You get a letter from the DWP or EIBSS, it's got a form in it. You must, the waggy finger comes out. There's no room for, there's no sort of compassion in writing, if you like, that you must do this by then, you must tell us this, you must tell us that. If you don't, penalties will apply. And it's so aggressive, and it just doesn't need to be like that. And I think it's actually all part of the same problem.
Mark, you'd wanted to end your evidence with a last photo on a happy note. It's 1591013, please. It's a photo that speaks for itself, but perhaps you'd like to describe it.
We were sat in Singapore, opposite a building site. We were actually there for the Formula One Grand Prix because it was one of my bucket lists. I always wanted to go to one. So we looked into it and we flew out. And the day before the Grand Prix, we were just having some lunch. And it was something that I'd thrown the idea out there about having a civil partnership and sort of see if it floated, and it didn't. So I was like, don't mention it no more. And then sitting in Singapore, all of a sudden Richard said, so if we were to have this civil partnership, where would it be? I nearly fell off my chair. And I was like, have you just said what I think you said? Yeah. So I was like, oh, we'll have to talk about it. It was in Durham, and it was a brilliant day. And it didn't spoil my day, but even on my wedding day, when you have to take the tablets twice a day, you're still reminded of what lurks inside. So that monster never really goes away. And Richard is I'll say the calm to my storm. He was the calm to my storm and can be the calm to my storm. But when you've been told that you probably won't live long enough to leave school, to then get to a point where I've got somebody in my life who loves me for me, sees the darkness, which I hate, and I never want to argue with him. I think in 16 years we've probably only had a couple of arguments. That's been about bloody DWP, because they make me go bang. He talks me down off the ceiling, and when I was diagnosed with the PTSD, the dreams I have are like something out of Doctor Who, where all the doors open and the Cybermen come out and they drag me to the dentist chair and they start wrapping me in plastic. And as they're wrapping me in plastic, I can see the doctors and I can see the faces and I can hear their voices laughing and talking about me. And as the plastic goes over my face, I wake up screaming. And my rock's there. And I told him I loved him on that day, and I love him even more every day.
I'm just going to ask Mr. Snowden if there's any further questions he wants me to ask. No. Richard, Mark, is there anything further either of you would like to say?
Yes, please. Richard's going to go first.
Go on, Mike.
Yeah.
This won't take long. I've done it in big print. So, firstly, like many others who have spoken, I'd like to thank you, Sir Brian, and everybody else around you, your team, for your compassion and humanity. And I genuinely mean compassion, having talked about it so much. Particularly you, sir, your visibility during the breaks and lunches speaks volumes to me and gives me, and I think both of us, some confidence that this inquiry is heading in the right direction. Thank you for that. Thank you also to the technical team. I'm in the same sort of line of work and well used to being behind the scenes. I'm first in and last out. I think you probably... And finally, the Trelaws boys. We were accepted into your group at the preliminary hearings last September. Mark as a brother and me as the token well person round the dinner table. Your love and support has helped me with the confidence and fire I need to sit here today. Oh, perhaps I also ought to thank Mark's mum too. She's my mother-in-law after all. Anyway, the serious point. Sir Brian, the day after you release your report and recommendations, the survivors of this scandal will still have to attend their treatment centres. And those centres are often places where little real support is on offer. It should come as no surprise that those attending have mental health issues, and yet those issues are routinely ignored or played down. Instead, discrimination or attack has been the response. Unlike heterosexual couples, we've never been warned of any potential risks to me, nor have I been offered any training to help Mark administer his factor treatment. We've been treated with contempt and told, "This is a family unit," that's a quote, and it means, don't rock the boat, do as you're told. It never once occurred to those members of staff that anxiety or PTSD might be behind the tears, and that for me must change. I'm not suggesting a red carpet while being fanned and fed grapes, just care and real compassion. My closing message is, if a patient tells you they're frightened, listen, you might learn something. Thank you.
Can I, for my part, ask a couple of questions? Actually, from you, Richard.
Yes.
First a question, then a matter of opinion, because I would rather, like the doctor in St Thomas's, value your opinion. The first question, and forgive me for asking this, you told us that you knew when you were in for a day with Mark. What do you think today would be?
For me personally, in my normal work, I'm behind the scenes, and for me to sit up here fills me with a certain amount of horrors and dread. Because we've done it together, I'm here, I'm looking forward to my lunch, if I'm perfectly honest about it.
I think we probably all are.
Well, yes, I'm sorry that we've perhaps gone on a little long, but because for me, I'm quite looking forward to getting back to the shadows, if I'm completely honest.
But what about Mark? And what day did you think was this a day he was going to be spinning or not?
No.
He hasn't.
No, he hasn't.
But did you think he would?
No, actually I didn't, because this is a day we've waited for a very long time. The day when somebody listens to what we've got to say. And that's probably been the most important thing about today. That however uncomfortable I feel sitting here, and perhaps Mark feels it as well, everybody's listening, and it's been a long time coming.
The matter of opinion, really, it's exactly the same point that Miss Richards touched on in her additional questions. And it's about your comment that the medics who think they are as compassionate as they come don't manage to communicate that to those they are compassionate about, if they are. How do we improve it? You've asked for improvement. Do you have any suggestion as to quite how?
That's going to be a difficult one, because for me, it's going to be a fairly fundamental change in the way the NHS works, or in this part of the NHS. I think I've got to be a little bit careful because, like everybody else says, if I go to the NHS now as an emergency patient into A&E, the treatment is fantastic and nobody's going to argue that point. But in these particular instances where the people involved have also been doing research, the compassion has come over really cold, and the research hasn't necessarily been carried forward and explained to the patients. I don't think I'm answering your question, am I?
Well, in a way.
Yeah.
But if you have further thoughts about that, do let us know.
Thank you.
I'll come back to you in a moment, but can I thank Mark? You told us what it is like of you living in the shadow of the valley of death with the constant fear of discrimination and the effects that it's had on you, effects which Richard has amplified. Can I just thank you for that? And Richard, can I thank you for your thoughtful suggestions as to what might be improved, and your evidence about Mark validating and vindicating that position. Thank you both for being there to support each other. And it is now.
So, sorry, I hesitate to interrupt, but I know Mark has something he wants to say
Mark,
in conclusion.
Mark, I'm sorry. I had made the mistake of thinking that Richard was talking for you both.
No. No.
Do you ever let him?
Of course. Fair's fair. I won't be a moment. But
I am sorry. I do apologise.
Thank you. I would like to start by paying tribute to the thousands of victims caught up in this disaster. The everyday people who have demanded answers along with justice for far too long. To those little boys labelled as the doomed ones who never had the chance to grow up, whose voices were stolen from our community. The families torn apart, living in fear of stigma, attack, hatred and cruelty. The brave people who have spoken out, placing their lives at risk to make the world more understanding and one in which I believe attitudes are changing. I sit here in front of you as living proof of what atrocities can be inflicted upon a child. Damaged, yes, but with those who are unable to attend in my heart. Me speaking out meant others didn't feel pressured, yet placed my family in the firing line. For me, there was no choice. How could I think about representing our community from the shadows? As this inquiry keeps hearing from victims, here in 2019, haemophiliacs are still terrified of what will happen to them based on numerous assaults and attacks. The life of a haemophiliac is an expensive one to maintain. Not my words, but those of a former minister of Her Majesty's government. For years, I have hated that statement because in my mind it conjures up images of some old classic car kept out of sight and left to rot. However, now I'm older, I think it probably does reflect what I have become. Not in bad shape, leaks a bit with a few creaks and rattles, but still with a few miles in it yet. As I've travelled around the United Kingdom, offering the one thing that officials have failed to do for so long, compassion, I realised whatever the outcome of this inquiry, the history books will have to be rewritten. Not to reflect the narrative many have been deceived by for almost 4 decades, but the remarkable people whose bravery and determination should be a lesson to all those outside of this nightmare. One beautiful example of this happened earlier this year. As I stood with a cup of tea waiting for the next witness to give their statement, a gentleman approached me with his wife and a couple of other people. He asked me in a very soft voice if he could shake my hand because he had never met a living haemophiliac with HIV before. I put my tea down and said, well, now you have one as a friend, and gave them all a hug. I have genuinely felt true friendship and love from so many amazing people, and there are too many here today to name each one of you, but I love you so very, very much. It did make me think, however, I'm stuck in what is essentially a mass extinction, and at some point, one of us will become the last living victim. I don't wish my life away, but I can honestly say I don't want that one to be me. The pain of losing those I love in this room and watching from beyond, I couldn't cope with that. It would be too hard to bear. Let us not forget, whilst little boys were being maimed and slaughtered, politicians and pharmaceutical companies around the globe grew their profits and gained power. Even today, with a death rate of one person dying every 96 hours, government officials continue to compound the suffering. Instead of hanging their heads in shame, they still show contempt, making dying people jump through hoops as they move the goalposts on the support provided. Those responsible for the abuses inflicted by the DWP, which are totally unnecessary, must be made to answer for their actions. Criticised by the United Nations, they continue to inflict fear by misusing their self-appointed powers on the vulnerable. One question I've been asked so many times over the years is, why has it taken so long for this to see the light of day? My reply is simple, really. When the people, with the people with all the power holding the trigger, who is left to bring them to justice? With respect to you, Sir Brian, and the remit of this inquiry, which I understand is unable to make judgments of criminality, I bring the public's attention to the failures of the systems we believe are in place to protect us and those who enforce them. I have been in communication with the Metropolitan Police for a number of years now, highlighting what I believe crimes committed against this vulnerable disabled community. And yet, my letters were ignored and requests for meetings denied, whilst others were taken forward, leading to a more recent public apology by the Metropolitan Police. To coin a phrase recently used by our Prime Minister, £60 million spaffed up the wall on historical offences. How will that protect people today? Well, I'll tell you. In our case, it can ensure such acts as misconduct in public office, crimes against humanity and genocide are prevented from happening again in the pursuit of profit. I am no fool, and I certainly do not believe I invented being a gay haemophiliac. This reveals how LGBT people with a bleeding disorder were seen in the past. The institutionalised homophobic attitudes, who never even recorded their existence, is relevant today as it has ever been. Judging people based solely on others' beliefs is unacceptable, and yet it's happening all around us on a daily basis within healthcare. I was effectively abandoned, isolated by some as a figure of, and seen as a figure of hate by some. At the age of 16, I pursued my dreams. By the age of 18, I had a number of gay friends who eventually took me out on the London gay scene, which made me question everything. Since then, I've worked at the biggest LGBT nightclub in the UK, and in doing so, unknowingly became part of London's proud gay history. I've been a volunteer for the West Midlands Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, the Terence Higgins Trust, and Open Door, a Brighton-based HIV drop-in centre. I proudly represented the haemophilia community at the unveiling of the AIDS Memorial in Brighton, and a monument which moves me every time I see it. I have travelled to the other side of the world to support the Australian victims of this same contaminated blood scandal, whose government have shamefully treated their victims in a similar manner to ours, and that's by ignoring them, hoping that they will all die and the problem will go away quickly. So, Brian, if I may be so bold as to offer a couple of recommendations for your consideration. The NHS is at the heart of this scandal, and I believe it can be our biggest tool in locating more victims. To begin with, the implementation of a more robust reporting requirement for homophobic abuses and a dedicated LGBTQ administrator within PALS set up. Updated education for patients and staff in hepatitis C clinics, gum clinics, sexual health and HIV centres. The patients already attending these services are asked on their next review if they have ever had a blood transfusion. If the answer is yes, then protocols are put in place to immediately trace the batch numbers and potential other victims, as well as the patient provided with information on how to access the various support schemes. For newly diagnosed patients, the same course of action, but with counselling made available immediately. Along with a national screening programme, educational advertisements on TV, radio and social media, tougher responses to hate speech concerning health, disability or sexuality in order to diminish the outdated myths and lies surrounding hepatitis C and HIV. The unique stories of horror recorded in this inquiry must never be forgotten. One fitting way of ensuring they are not would be to dedicate a section of the National Medical Training Guidelines to this tragedy. Finally, in true Oscar style, I would like to thank my mum for believing in me and never giving up. Like all haemophilia mums, for being the force of nature who has made me the man I am today. To Richard, who has been my world from the moment we met, I'm sorry that you have to see the damaged, frightened monster that I fight to keep restrained. I couldn't do it without you. To everyone who has come along today to support me, all those watching in, I send you my love again. Jan and Colin Smith, Anne, Sarah, Ellie Doricott, the Lewis family, Nikki and the family, Haemophilia Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the team in London. Finally, to you, Sir Brian, and your fabulous team. You have, as Richard said, shown true humanity. I believe in you, and the team that you've got around you is just amazing. The final word has to go to Paul. Oh, no, with an engineer husband, I have to say thank you to the technical team and everybody else. And, of course, Kylie Minogue. Thank you, Sir Brian.
Thank you. Three o'clock. 3 o'clock after lunch.